their business experience is absolute garbage, like hot steaming garbage, in my opinion. And I know this because I just went and bought like a couple MacBooks for my team a few weeks ago, and it was just like such a fiasco, man. Like it's unclear what you're supposed to do. The support people, while nice, were like not super helpful. And it was a reminder for me. I'm like, okay, you could be the best in the business and still have shortcomings, still have things you haven't thought about, still think of like areas you're not communicating clearly, processes that are just like broken or inefficient. And so I think there's a lot of businesses that they forget some of those really critical points in the experience that they could really make better.
Building great experiences, revolutionize your business. Building great experiences, innovative strategies. Building great experiences, elevate for your customers. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Hey folks, this is Drew with another episode of the Building Great Experiences podcast. Today I've got John Mader with me. We met probably 6 or 7 months ago, just around when I quit corporate and started StealthX and became fast friends. We've worked on a project together, he and his partner, Aaron Putnam, over at Working Title Partners. Awesome folks. He has a long history of working in the marketing space. So today we're going to be talking about the intersection of customer experience, what I do, and marketing, what he does. So John, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, man. It's good to be here.
Yeah, no, for sure. So why don't you start, just give folks a little bit more about you, backstory, kind of, how you got started, where you came from, and what you're doing now.
Sure. So, now I've recently co-founded a company called Working Title Partners with Aaron Putnam, great production guy, video guy, executive producer. Founded that company in January and have had a really fun run since last year, for the last 12 months at this point, getting that business off the ground and putting the last 20 plus years of experience to work on our own, if you will. I started my career, I have a PR degree, started my career at Ogilvy Public Relations, working in the tech industry right around 2000, which is a fun time to be in tech until, 2001. But 2000 was a great time to be in tech. It was
Great time to be alive.
Yeah, a lot of fun stuff going on with AOL, with ISPs, with the broadband wars. So everything from CRMs getting invented to the infrastructure side of bringing broadband, kind of to the masses was a lot of fun to work on back then. After my stint at Ogilvy, I ended up at the CDC. I was living in Atlanta, worked for the Chronic Center at the CDC, which really gave me good exposure to how the media really works at a grand sort of mass scale. So the good, bad, and the ugly of how journalism works in the United States, and also a greater appreciation for people. So the first 3 years really focused on that tech space. So a very highly educated market, very tech forward market from an audience standpoint. And then that time at the CDC, we used to talk a lot about everything we had to write, is translating epidemiology into 8th grade, 9th grade reading levels, really to get to the masses, right? And understanding how the mass world takes in information, how they read things, how they learn, and then how they apply it. So there's a lot of the CDC around behavior change and behavior change science that I thought was really interesting as it applied to communications and to marketing. My wife and I moved to Charlotte in 2005. I ended up landing at an agency called Ray Ward. Great place. I spent from 2006 until the end of last year at Ray Ward, started in the PR team there. What was interesting about my journey there was my jobs changed kind of as technology evolved and as communication evolved. So starting in that PR traditional role, as social media, Facebook, iPhones became a big thing, brands started creating a lot more of their own content. I sort of hopped that fence from the earned media space and PR into content marketing and brand journalism. I got into video production in that role. That's where I met Aaron Putnam. We built a video team at Ray Ward, got that off the ground and running. And then I was moved into a job that was called Connections at Ray Ward that was leading all the integrated comms disciplines at the agency. So public relations, content marketing, email marketing, direct marketing, paid media, all the marketings, any channel that you'd want to communicate with someone through. So that was a really, really interesting and good sort of 10-year run of leading that and bringing integrated communications together in really an intentional way. There's a lot of agencies that say they do it, right? We do integrated comms, we have all the channels. Most of them are very siloed and they don't actually put together integrated communications plans and strategies for how they're going to leverage the different channels to communicate with different audiences. So long story of how I got to where I am now. But a lot of fun along the way.
Yeah. Super fascinating. I actually didn't remember you sharing about the CDC. That's really fascinating. Also, very curious. So, the topic of the conversation, intersection of customer experience marketing. Obviously, you have a lot of comms in your background. There's two things that you mentioned in your story that I think are really fascinating, and to me are good like threads we can pull on for the intersection piece. Which one was around behavioral science component, right? Like, why do people do what they do, right? And that's a huge part of customer experience. It's like understanding customers and determining how can you build or design something so that customers are happy and customers continue to buy and customers become loyal. And the other thing you mentioned was all around comms and, and channels and kind of like how you communicate across channels. And one of the things in the customer experience world that I think is people talk about a lot, but the people don't do it very well is this concept of like omni-channel, right? And like, how do you provide a great experience across all channels? And a facet of that is communication, right? It's not just like, hey, are all the things connected to one another and working as expected or whatever, but it's also like, how are you communicating proactively to the customer? How are you letting them know what to expect? How are you expressing the brand in a unique and different way that, resonates? So those are a few things that just come to mind from what you share, but I'd love to hear your perspective. Like, what do you see as some of the key intersections between customer experience and what you do?
So I may have a different perspective on it than most marketers, probably because of my public relations background. I hold PR in a high regard and high esteem. And when I think about PR, I don't think about publicity. It's not about publicity. It's not about being a spin doctor. It's not about, you might see a PR person on a TV show, right? That's just trying to save executives skin every day, and trying to spin stories for the good of the cause, whatever that might be, even if it's a bad cause. I view PR sort of more holistically in the terms that it really is about helping to build a relationship between an organization and the customers, the consumers, the people, really, and generally that organization's success depends upon. And if you look at it from a broader point of view and you don't get stuck into PR people are connections to journalists and their job is to drive earned media. If you think about it a bigger picture, that their job is to build that relationship. And then you think about from a channel standpoint, I'm channel agnostic in terms of the decisions I make in which I want to communicate with those people. Then communication really becomes the center of all of it, right? Like, even if you get down to a store level, right? The ability for a greeter at the door to make someone comfortable when they walk in to a store, welcome to Walmart, whatever that is, to the experience in the aisle if you have a question, right? Smart people walking around the store that can communicate effectively and help solve problems at the point of purchase or at the point of research in the aisle. All of that comes down to communication and the ability to connect with your audience or your customer. So whether that's in an online world or an offline world or through email marketing or you said at a cash register, it all comes down to that communication, that relationship that you're building with the customer.
Yeah. It's funny how I think a lot of companies, they talk about it, but then they almost like neglect the fact that they're actually talking to humans, right? It becomes more of this like, let's just execute the thing so we can check the boxes that we did the things we're supposed to do, right? Like we communicated these words to these sort of like automatons or whatever. There you go. I was like, how do I say that word? Automatons, and it's like, no, there's real people on the other side of that. And like, from my perspective, I think one of the things that often gets missed, business leaders, they are sort of like checking the box and they don't actually talk to their customers and figure out like, in the case of communication, like, where's the communication breaking down? Where are things not clear? Like, how are you helping, kind of guide that person through the process or through the journey, through your words, and it's words not just that are on paper or on their website or on an ad or whatever, but it's like, to your point, like frontline workers, like what are they saying to customers? Like who come in through, in a retail environment, come in through the door and they're like, okay, where do I go? What do I do? What happened? It's like, how are the sales associates communicating to those people? Like, what are the words they're actually saying? And how are you incorporating your brand values, right, into that language? I think it's so important. And I don't know if you've heard a couple podcasts, I've talked about this idea that there's like different altitudes of experience. So there's product, which is kind of the base level. It's like either the digital physical thing that you're selling or, giving the customer access to. Then service, which is kind of across those different products or like kind of the end-to-end service experience. And then third altitude is brand, just kind of like cumulative sum of all the different things that you're doing with your customer, saying to your customer, right? That in their mind is like who you are, your brand. And then kind of above that is cross brand, which I call ecosystem. And I think like what you're pointing at is like the brand altitude, right? It's like, it's not just, hey, what's the copy in this thing? Or what's the, the words that people are using at, in this, like the contact center, for example, but it's like, how does all of that stuff come together to create a coherent brand and experience for the customer?
Sure. And it's really easy to stand here and say that it needs to all be consistent and you've got to talk to your customer and connect with them in an important way. That's really hard, right? The bigger the enterprise, the harder and harder that gets. You think about a Lowe's, right, or a Home Depot, and that the bigger the company gets, the harder every single one of those touch points being perfect is going to be. Even in a B2B manufacturing environment, right? I mean, the CEO has been around forever. The sales guys have all been around forever, and they like to do things their way as well. And even when the customer changes, it's, well, no, we sell like this, so the customer needs to meet us where we are, versus the customer's trying to buy this way, and we should evolve to meet the customer in their space. Because the companies that are doing that best, those are the disruptors, right? I mean, this is why you have startups that can come into an industry that's been around forever and throw their weight around, because they can deliver that experience in a better way than the company that's been around for 100 years that's kind of having a tougher time evolving is able to do.
Yeah, I'm curious. So you've had a long career and you worked in this space for a while. What are some examples, either from like companies you've worked with or outside, just companies that you admire that do this well? Like who's kind of out there doing communications and customer experience well from your perspective?
I think it's really easy to say Apple, because everybody knows the Apple experience. The Apple Store experience is good. The product is great. All of your levels of stuff with Apple is great. They obviously didn't build that overnight. They talked about working in the tech industry in 2000, so 20 years ago, Apple was just another computer maker. It really wasn't until the iPhone, right, or the iPod to the iPhone, that they were able to revolutionize and connect with consumers in different ways. And, now I look around my office, I have Apple products everywhere. But I think, the other companies that are doing interesting things are mostly the smaller companies, the startups, the ones that are privately owned, the ones that aren't afraid to do things a little bit differently, the ones that probably aren't driven by monthly and quarterly profits. The public companies tend to have a harder time with this because they're so short-term bottom line thinking all the time. Just because we're around Christmas, the couple brands that I've engaged with recently that I thought have done really nice jobs. There's a company called Noteworthy. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're a fragrance company. I think a relative startup in the space. So normally you think of a fragrance or perfume company, right? You think of Chanel or Christian Dior or Polo. So they're a new brand in that space. So how do you go and you compete with these brands that have been around for 100 years and everybody knows, and they go to the department stores and they buy them for Christmas? So they captured my wife's attention somehow, probably on Instagram. And their whole pitch was, we will find your scent, right? We'll help you find your scent that's distinctive to you. So, all right, so you click on the site, you fill out a little survey. What are you interested in? All the things, right? And then they send you for maybe it's $20. They send you like 5 samples based on the way you filled out this questionnaire. So my wife does this. She gets these 5 samples, and she's wearing a different one every day. And then she's like, all right, well, I want one of these for Christmas. So which one do you like best? Like, pick one out and buy one for Christmas. And then you can take and she's like, and here's this code they sent with these samples. So I paid $20 for the samples. Here's the code. They give you $20 off the purchase. You log on. They've all got their own numbers. You type them in, brings up all the stuff you ordered. And super seamless, super easy, easiest Christmas present I've ever had to buy. And of course, because I went and bought it, and then now they've got my phone number and my email. So now I'm getting the repeat. Come buy these other 4 that you didn't buy. And the boxing experience was nice, right? Both with the samples and with the actual product. Came in a nice box, delivered on time. They did everything they said they were going to do. And it feels bespoke and unique to the buyer. I mean, that's a really good experience that Chanel probably doesn't need, right? Chanel number 5, everybody knows it. It's built the brand over 100 and some odd years. But for a disruptor in the space, that's a heck of an experience, both online and off. The other one that I think is interesting, so over the holidays, I went skiing and I went out to Telluride. I'd never been to Telluride. I've been to most of the resorts on the other parts of Colorado, Vales, Breckenridge, Beaver Creek, Copper, all of those over the years. I'd never been out west of Telluride. Telluride's privately owned. Most of those other big resorts are owned by conglomerates. Vail Resorts owns most of them, as well as Park City and a couple resorts out in Utah. So because I'm out skiing, social media has given me all the skiing content from around the country. And while I'm hanging out in Telluride with this great app that they've developed that shows me lift line times, which are all pretty short. It's got the map of the area. It's got the snowfall. It's got the weather. They've got a gondola that takes you from the main town of Telluride up over the mountain, up to the resort, and all over the place. It's all free. And I'm having this great experience in Telluride. All I'm seeing on social media is how Vail's just getting wrecked because of the lines at Park City. And the lines at Park City are long because they're in a labor dispute for apparently $2 an hour for the snow safety patrol people that work at Park City. So Vail Resorts, which owns, 50% of all the ski resorts in the US, it's some stupid number, is just getting destroyed the week after Christmas because of a labor dispute that they didn't handle right. So internal comms communication, right, that they're having an issue with. They didn't communicate to the people coming out to Park City about it. So they're upset. There's been no communication with the skiers or any of the visitors on a very expensive vacation. So it's like, in Park City, historically, has had an amazing reputation for a great place to go skiing. Meanwhile, Deer Valley's 2 miles away, and they've unveiled this new lift that has a wind guard that comes down with heated seats. And all I can think is, Vail's getting crushed because of their consumer experience. With the biggest brand in skiing, in ski resorts, just getting annihilated in the biggest skiing week of the year, while the privately owned places are just crushing it with great experiences and great customer experience. So those are the two that pop in when you ask the question.
No, that's really good. It's funny, to the Vail example, it's really interesting if you think about like the inverse of like who's doing it not well, or like what's an example where a company doesn't hit the mark. And I think in that case, Vail like missed an opportunity to just be proactive and say like, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing about it. Here's how we're going to like make it right. Like, or even just saying like, hey, for, reasons beyond our control, here's these things that are happening, but like, we want to, we'll give you a discount. We'll give you some sort of, comp, whatever. And probably you'd be like, man, Vail is amazing, right? Because they, even in spite of this situation, and this, they've communicated clearly, proactively, they've done things above and beyond to help make sure that my, experience, albeit not perfect, is like as good as it possibly can be. And it almost like that separates them in your minds, right? Because even if the experience wasn't phenomenal, and I think there's a lot of lessons behind those moments for big brands where, like, if you remember, this is probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago now, but when Wells Fargo had that funny thing with the people that were signing up credit cards, right? And it was like basically they were fraudulently getting people to sign up for credit cards because they were trying to hit a bonus or whatever, or like the individual bankers were trying to get bonuses. There's a whole bunch of mud on their face because of that, right? And like, how much different would it have been if Wells Fargo had like owned up to it in a different way, communicated about it in a different way, right? But there was a lot of this kind of like, how do we like salvage? It was like salvage mode. Like, it's kind of the, like you said, like spin doctor, right? Like, you got the PR people are trying to go into spin doctor mode to make it not feel as bad. So yeah, and it's also funny. So I actually recently wrote a post on LinkedIn about Apple. I'm a huge Apple fanboy. Like, I've got AirPods in my ears, a watch on my arm. I've got a MacBook in front of me, like all Apple all day. But what's funny about it is like, they are known for their consumer experience, like the best in the business. Everybody praises them. Their business experience is absolute garbage, like hot steaming garbage, in my opinion. And I know this because I just went and bought like a couple MacBooks for my team a few weeks ago, and it was just like such a fiasco, man. Like, it's unclear what you're supposed to do. The support people, while nice, were like not super helpful. And it was a reminder for me. I'm like, okay, you could be the best in the business and still have shortcomings, still have things you haven't thought about, still think of like areas you're not communicating clearly, processes that are just like broken or inefficient. And so I think there's a lot of businesses that they forget some of those really critical points in the experience that they could really make better. I had two other ones that I want to throw out there. So you mentioned, I forgot the fragrance brand you mentioned. Yeah, Noteworthy. Thank you. Have you ever bought or heard of Flaviar? It's like a whiskey subscription box kind of a thing. Very similar experience to what you described. It's basically like, you sign up, super simple. The copy is like on point, very like on brand. When it arrives every month, there's this really neat packaging that you don't want to throw away, because it's like these little glass test tubes with these like corks in them and these like premium labels or whatever. And like, the messaging is kind of woven throughout all of the different pieces. Like, you get these like little coasters for your glass that are like embossed and all these things. And it's a really great experience, but it's from a smaller, privately owned brand, right? They're willing to make those investments that maybe increase your cost of goods on the order, but extend the quality of the experience, which make people much more willing to stay a lifelong customer or stay a customer for a long time, right? You increase your lifetime value of that customer because you're not just like churning and burning and just constantly trying to acquire another customer and another customer. Customers can feel that. I think that's honestly where a lot of marketers miss it, is they're like, spending so much energy on acquisition, they forget that the retention piece, like the back door is wide open. All these customers come to the front door, and there's walking out the back door. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's sometimes I feel like the whole relationship thing in marketing is overdone. Do I really want to have a relationship with my laptop? But from a company standpoint, I think it's really, really important to act like a nice human, right? If you make a mistake, apologize. If you for Vail, right? If you have a situation at one of your resorts over the holiday week that's bad, do something at that resort to fix it. Don't just be like, oh, everything's great at our 99% of our properties, so we'll get through this, everyone will get over it, and they'll move on, and they'll forget about it in 2 weeks, and the news cycle will roll over. And like, do something, ask for forgiveness, make amends, take care of people. Like, I think that's the sort of the golden level of your ability to have longevity as a company too. And obviously, I'm not an executive, I don't run the numbers, I don't know what it would cost, Vail to give everyone who bought a week-long pass a 25% discount, or, God forbid, pay their people $2 more an hour. But I don't know. You got to do something. Like, it seems like just sitting back and getting kicked in the teeth over and over again is not a real great strategy. And on Apple's side, I mean, they built a machine to deal with consumers. But yeah, as a business owner, it's not great. Um, but they know who their audience is too, right? They're 99% of their business is the consumer. Um, so they probably ought to have a little business SWAT team that could help people out. That's it's a really good, probably an opportunity for them, but probably really hard for them to even see that there's a problem or a different way they need to zig to take care of those people. Or the cost just isn't worth it because you're going to buy it anyway and you're going to figure it out and stumble through it. And the experience isn't going to be great, but they've got your money. You're not going back to a PC. So it is what it is.
Yeah. I love this conversation. I feel like there's a lot of nuggets in what you've said that people can apply. So I'd love for you to kind of like, what are some practical things that people listening can do in their business, right? Whether it's related to comms or marketing or customer experience. Because I think one of the things that I talk to a lot of folks about is they're like, Drew, I hear you talk about customer experience and I get it, but like, it's like super like experience, right? Like what does that really, what do I do? Like, how do I make that better? And I'm a big believer in, it doesn't have to be this huge gesture, right? Like in the case of the veil story you were talking about, like maybe it's not like giving a discount. Maybe it's simply just communicating empathetically that
What's
like,
going
hey,
on?
I know, yeah, like, hey, this sucks and we know that it's not ideal and we're really, really sorry and we're trying to do the best that we can and our staff is under, whatever. Like, I think people are willing to give grace when they feel like people aren't trying to like pull the wool over their eyes or act like nothing's wrong or try, or just, worse, even worse, just being like, deal with it. Like, not our problem. Right.
Sorry goes a long way, right?
Yeah. So anyway, what are some practical things folks can implement in their organizations?
So I always think the place to start is understanding your customer or your audience. And everybody says that, right? All right, so what does that mean? Do I got to go build personas? Do I have to pull a bunch of research? And there, science plays a part. I think the, data is important. But I don't know if this is controversial either. I think intuition is a huge part of it. I think there's stuff around understanding customer or understanding audience that data can't tell you, that experience can. So understanding who your audience is and understanding how they interact with your brand or with your product, I think is really important. I love a journey map, and people have different, when you say journey map, different things pop into people's heads. I don't mean like a CX journey map where we're talking about 100 touch points and super detailed and they go back and forward. And by the time you're done, it looks like a big squiggly mess because nothing is actually linear. What works for my brain is a pretty simple journey map. How are we getting in front of them or making them aware that we exist? How are we getting into their consideration set? So giving them a piece of information or experience that's allowing them to consider us as an option. How are we overcoming that hurdle to purchase? And then what are we doing until we see them again? Right? How do we get them back? And if you start with at least the basics of that, right? Your awareness, consideration, purchase, and return or engagement or brand, whatever you want to call it at the end. I think you can very quickly, with most companies, with most clients I've worked with, it's very quickly to identify where the biggest hurdles are, right? So some companies have a great product and they're like, man, once we get our product into their hands, they're like, I don't know how I live without this. And some of those companies people have heard of, but they've never experienced it, right? So a Sunbrella is an interesting example of that. Most people probably heard of Sunbrella, right? They have pretty good brand awareness, right? It's a fabric, it goes on umbrellas, it's outside furniture. But are you willing to spend the premium on it? Well, once you experience it and you experience how easy stains are to clean and you experience how soft it actually is and that it doesn't feel like maybe your perception of outdoor furniture and it being rough, it's really easy to get that sale, right? There's some brands that people have never heard of, right? So it's like, well, if people just knew we existed, we'd be a whole lot better off. So once you're able to figure out what those hurdles are, or maybe maybe they've heard of you, they love you, but they can't figure out how to buy you because your distribution is so limited. Once you can figure out where that hurdle point is, for a lot of companies, most companies don't have $100 million to invest in marketing and CX. So where do you point your resources that are going to have the biggest impact? And again, like, you can study it. There's data. A lot of companies probably could spend the majority of their marketing budget on trying to figure out what to do and then not do anything. And I think there's a lot of value, especially with smaller organizations, or even medium-sized organizations that have marketing spends that are less than $10 million, of doing something, using your intuition, using whatever data you have at your disposal, and act, and then learn, right? And then shift your strategy and act again, right? And learn. And that's a lot more productive than spending 10 months, building out a flushed on user experience strategy that doesn't, get you anywhere towards action. So, I don't know, what can you do? You can understand your customer, you can understand their journey with your product, you can figure out their hurdle points or their challenges along the way, and you can figure out the best way to solve those challenges. And then, you got to execute. And activation is the best plan. With poor activation is garbage. So you've got to pull it through, or you're never going to move the needle.
I think, man, nailed it. I think that it's easy to overcomplicate it, like, how do you make the experience better? Talk to customers, talk to some customers, challenge your assumptions, and then execute. And it doesn't have to be, to your point, this like you've over-engineered and identified every possible problem and gone through this whole, great lengths to kind of like assess like every way that people move through your service or purchase products from you. It doesn't have to be that complicated. I think sometimes people can make it that way. It's like the perfect becomes the enemy of great, right? People, they try to fixate on perfection, and really it's like perfect is an illusion. Like, focus on great. So I mean, the podcast is called Building Great Experiences, not building perfect experiences, right? Because it's like, if you're never going to make it perfect. It's not, you're always going to miss something. To add to what you said, are you familiar with the 11-star framework that Brian Chesky at Airbnb talked about? It's really, I love it, and I'm going to like butcher it because there's like specific things that he kind of lays out, but over generalized, basically he talks about like, okay, if you're going to Airbnb, what's a 5-star experience? And it's like, well, you show up, the host greets you at the door, knows your name, offers you some cookies or whatever, like, and a glass of milk, and shows you around. It's like, cool, 5-star experience, right? Everything you need is there. That's fine. I was like, okay, well, what's a 6-star experience? I'm like, well, there's extra goodies. Like, I'm getting better service than a hotel, right? Like, I'm having all these sort of extra perks and benefits. And he kind of goes through the list, and then he gets to like, okay. And like each time, as you can imagine, like he's building up to like, now what's like a 9-star, and so on. It's like, he gets to like the 11-star, and it's basically like Elon Musk meets you at the door and he's like, we're going to space, right? And it's like, that's the Airbnb 11-star experience. And I share that because it's a really interesting exercise to think about, like, working backwards too. So there's sort of the like, look at what you have and figure out how to improve it. It's like these incremental changes, right? And sort of this like, hey, let's like fine tune some of the stuff, or like, let's make it easier or whatever. But then there's also like, go to the extreme and then think about like, what is achievable or feasible, that's like somewhere between where you are and that crazy sort of like far out North Star, and then start to build towards that, right? And obviously, like, Elon Musk greeting you at your door and taking you to space through a SpaceX rocket, it's probably not going to happen, right? But there's probably some, like, opens your mind to like, well, what is something that we could do that's maybe like a little bit unexpected, or has that surprise and delight that, gets a customer to be like, wow, this is different. Like, this is completely unique. And I've been saying this a lot on the podcast, but I believe it now more than ever. Right now, because of AI, because of technology is coming out, everybody, status quo is fast and easy. Like, fast and easy is normal. Like, you're not better than anybody else if you're just fast and easy. You got to have different. You have to have unique. You have to be differentiated from anybody else, because otherwise you're just competing. It's your commodity, right? And so I really believe like part of the opportunity for business leaders is to think about like what are those things that they can do for their customers that's unusual or, is uncommon, because that's really, I think, what's going to separate them from others who are just doing what everybody else is doing and slapping AI on it and calling it a day, or, making it fast and easy. It's an easy, again, it's easy to get caught in that trap, right? Because you're like, oh, we just got to make it faster. We got to make it easier. We got to make it more efficient. And you're like, that's fine, but everybody's doing that. So what are you going to do that's going to make you unique from the next brand?
Yeah. I mean, I love that. So you talked about omni-channel earlier, and omni-channel planning or multi-channel planning from a comm standpoint. And so many brands just want to divide up the pie 25 different ways. Like, well, we got to advertise, and we got to do email, and we got to have a website, right? And we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to have in store, we have to do all the things. And to your point, it's what, okay, if you go back to that consumer experience, it's where's the hurdle? How can we have the biggest impact? And how's it going to be different than what everyone else is doing, so it doesn't just blend in, right? And so you layer that on top, and you come up with your really creative solutions. I love that 11-star idea. That's interesting. Reminds me of a few years ago, we went on a trip out west, and one of the cabins we stayed in, Elon Musk wasn't there to take us to Mars, but they had really cool telescopes sitting right at this big window off the back deck with like the directions on how to use them, in this super dark place out west, which was cool. It's like an added little thing, right? That, all right, so I could go outside with the kids and, look at the stars. It's a super little added thing, right? That just makes your experience just that much better, and grand scheme of things doesn't cost them anything. Yeah.
I think that so one of the things that I'll throw out there too, with this whole idea of like the 11-star experience, sometimes I also have heard people be like, okay, Drew, like, yeah, get it. Elon takes you to space, but like, what does that really look like? And so I think it's like I've worked with companies that are like in boring, quote unquote, boring industries, right? They're working in manufacturing industry, for example, and they're like, we make large equipment on manufacturing floors. There's nothing really fancy about what we do. We can't do anything special or crazy. And I'm like, well, hold on, time out. Let's think about it. Your business is other businesses, and they are doing a job. They're getting up every day. They're working their 9 to 5. They're processing orders and cutting checks and et cetera, like shipping stuff. Like, what is something that you can do that is like unexpected for that person? And it might even just simply be like, I don't know, smiling. Like, as silly as it sounds, right? Like, in an industry where everybody's frowning or grumpy, like maybe just smiling will actually be an unexpected surprise, right? Or remembering somebody's name. I think there's a lot of things, if you look at 50, 60, 70 years ago when people were in business, there was a lot of those sort of like, I don't know, look somebody in the eye, shake their hand kind of moments that we forget. And they're like small gestures, but they have big impact. And so depending on your industry, things like that, small gestures could actually make a pretty big and meaningful impact, particularly if you're in B2B, like,
yeah. And those
B2B is such a relationship business,
Those companies that sell into manufacturing environments are, especially equipment, right? What are they focused on? Cost, speed, efficiency, right? Uptime. It's very, very product feature. So what they have to focus on is, how am I helping my customer deliver a better product, right? That's first. But all of that's just checking boxes. And chances are there's a competitor out there that does the same exact thing as you, has a product that's very similar. And when yours breaks, or at the end of its 5 to 10 year life cycle, when it's done, right, and they go out to competitive bid again, they probably don't care, right? It's sort of a commodity, unless you've built some kind of relationship. So to your point about, just smiling or being nice or being their buddy, right? There's a lot of the old school sales guys, but as sales teams shrink, as those sales teams get older and retire out and they're getting replaced with younger sales associates, what else can a brand do to build those relationships? And it still comes back to solving problems, right? So if you're selling a big piece of technology equipment into a manufacturing floor, that plant manager who's making that, or engineer who's making that decision on what piece of equipment goes into that line, his biggest problem every day probably isn't that piece of equipment. His biggest problem is probably talent, right? Today, it's probably about keeping people on the line. So, how are you making those guys' jobs easier? Why do those guys love your brand? So they're telling their boss, we got to keep this company. His biggest problem might be his small town that's dying, right? So, can you go in and sponsor little league teams, right? Like, what else can you do on the ground that so that guy's going to see you and relate to you and want to continue doing business with you as a company? And so much of that on the B2B side comes back to relationships. And I think that's where the really good, the really solid sort of B2B companies are manufacturing environments or other companies are able to win on the ground. You got to have good tech, but a lot of that stuff's table stakes, you know?
Yeah, man, can't agree more. John, this has been phenomenal conversation. Really appreciate you being on the show. Where can folks find you online?
Sure. So our website is workingtitlepartners.com. I'm on LinkedIn. My email is jmater@workingtitlepartners.com. So all really easy places to find me. Drew, like you said, we met earlier this year, or I guess now it's 2025. We met the middle of 2024. I feel like we're on a similar journey in, leaving big agencies and consulting companies and running out on our own. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you. And I've enjoyed this conversation too. I could talk about this stuff all day with you. It's fun.
Yeah, man, me too. And I appreciate the insights you've shared. Folks, you can find me online pretty much at Drew H. Burdick on all social channels and drewburdick.com. John, thanks again for being on the show, man. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for having me.